What I'd like to talk about tonight, or at least what I've been told to talk about, is insight. Insight training, which is quite difficult, actually. But I'll try and get some angle on it. First of all, the question is, what is insight training? And the answer to that is you cannot train for insight. We train for mindfulness. All our training is focused on developing mindfulness. And out of mindfulness, insight arises. So, all of you are probably already training for insight, but you're not realizing it because you're focused on mindfulness. The problem is, if your mind is too focused on mindfulness, you won't realize that you are developing insight. You won't realize that insight is there. So one has to adopt a very open, relaxed attitude to the mindfulness training, and then start to question, because insight develops out of questioning. So we question what is the nature of our experience that we are having at this moment. That is the basis of developing the curious mind that is able to experience insight. We say insight is self-arising. Self-arising. Now, that phrase is used quite a lot within the Buddhist context. In certain circumstances, if you do training, enlightenment is a condition that will self-arise. The tranquil mind is a condition that will self-arise. So we know that our training is mindfulness. Then we need to develop the open mind that is able to accommodate the appearance of insight. And I think that is where a lot of people have a problem in the world today, because our minds are so focused and we tend to become so intense about what we were doing that we actually block out insight. So probably all of you have experienced insight and are probably experiencing it on a regular basis, but the possibility is you're not recognizing it because you are blocking it. So a lot of our training in developing and recognizing insight depends upon the mind becoming less directed, less demanding, allowing that insight will appear in its own way once the conditions have been developed. Insight is the basis of growth. What we are all about at the moment in this game we're playing in our lives is to free the mind from ignorance. Those of you who are Buddhists will know that the Buddha said the primary obstacle to enlightenment is ignorance. And ignorance is not knowing clever things. It's ignorance as to the true nature of our being and of our experience. So we are often not seeing, not understanding, not getting the right aspect about what we are as human beings. One of the consequences of those is we live a life largely of distraction. Curiously enough, distraction in a very wide sense. It means that we don't allow ourselves to remain present long enough to see what's happening. We don't allow ourselves to remain present because we are always darting off after ideas, whatever it is that interests us in life. So insight is enabling the mind to pierce into those areas of distraction, recognize what we are doing, and then let go. So there's a huge amount of letting go rather than building up. You're not doing so much, you're undoing. You're allowing the mind to undo. So when we look at the place of insight, it is very close to mindfulness. The two sit very close side by side. Mindfulness we've defined, as all of you I think know, as knowing what is happening while it's happening. Yes. And then we've got a very easy definition for insight, which is recognizing what is happening while it's happening. So we're working all the time with this quality of recognition. Now, you can see why this is so crucial, because the fundamental basis of our being lost in samsara, you all know what samsara is? Anybody need an introduction? Okay, we all know about samsara. We're lost in delusion. Samsara is the deluded state. So now you can see why insight is such a liberating condition, because insight pierces the delusion and enables us to see what is really there, what is really happening. Now, that's the beginning of it, but it's not so easy to continue, because very often we don't want to see. We don't want to know what's going on. We prefer the comfort of the delusion. And somebody said, none are so blind as they who will not see. So we're proving that. We don't want to see. We want to remain in a state of comfortable delusion. So when we train in insight, there are a number of factors we have to overcome. First of all is this reluctance to see what's actually there. Once we've seen that, we have to see why it is. And then we discover the main condition that the human mind wants. It wants to be comfortable. The human mind, above all, wants to be comfortable. And insight disturbs that comfort. Insight brings in another factor, the factor of having to see what's there. Then, when that starts, we begin to realize that the main activity of the mind is grasping. So the mind is deluded and it's grasping. It's grasping all the time at experience which it feels will satisfy its need to perpetuate its sense of self. So the biggest need the mind has is to maintain and perpetuate the sense of self. Me, me, me. And it's quite radical in that. It will perpetuate sense of self even though it may have disastrous consequences. And this is why human beings remain unenlightened. So let's just look very briefly at what we mean by enlightenment. We know we are in a state of delusion. We know that the state of delusion has involved us in the mind poisons: greed, hatred, delusion, jealousy, and pride. We are involved in those. And the consequence is they have a natural ability to arise in our minds, much more so than positive qualities. Of course, you do have love and gratitude and compassion, but the negative ones in most people's minds arise most easily, most quickly. So our path to enlightenment is a path of breaking free from those 5. And the biggest of them all is delusion, because delusion is the anchor that holds the other 4 in place. So we are faced with the 5 mind poisons, and the main condition keeping them in place is ignorance. And this is why insight is so important, because insight is the sword that cuts through the deluded state. It cuts through and enables the mind to open up and see what is really happening. And it is through insight that we gradually explore to greater and greater depth what is happening. And when we do that, where do we finally arrive, do you think? When we pierce all the deluded states, where do we arrive? Well, just before enlightenment. We arrive at the state of realizing there's nothing there. And this is apparently, I've never had it, apparently a very alarming experience when you first realize emptiness. There is nobody here. So through insight, we get to that point.